All right. Hey, everybody. It's Jeremy, jeremy.net. Thank you for being a patron. Thank you for being a Patreon subscriber, supporting my channel, my creative endeavors, all the artwork and comics that I make. I greatly appreciate it. And thank you for joining me for another edition of Art Book Study Group. All right. Well, I have the Discord voice channel open. If anyone wants to hop in, please feel free to hop in, ask any questions, chit chat, hang out, what have you. So we're going to pick up where we left off. This is page 37 of Walt Reed, The Figure by Walt Reed, and this is a continuation of a section called Practical Uses. And this is really all about putting together all of the concepts that Reed has shown thus far in the book in terms of simple volumes, cylinders, and simple constructions. And, you know, what I have been doing is drawing these a little bit larger. So I've been taking the smaller drawings and scaling them up so that you could get a better look at them while I work. But I think, hang on a sec here, turn that off. Feel a sneeze. Excuse me. Sneeze coming on. I'm due for my allergy shots. I've got to go get that tomorrow. All right. I think instead of having one image at a time, so I'm drawing particularly large, I think these drawings are simple enough that I can just kind of draw this page just here on the side while I'm doing it. So let me shrink this down a little bit more. So I've got a little bit more room to play with on the drawing side. And let's put these drawings in a separate layer just so I've got some room to move them around if I need to. And we'll just dig right in. So let's see here. Settings here. I may mess around with the brush a little bit as I get going. All right, so, you know, when I look at this, the difference between how I tend to start a drawing and how Walt Reed tends to start a drawing is that he doesn't necessarily seem to be doing a kind of a stick figure, which is really how I tend to draw my drawings. Is I'll start with a very light, let me drop the opacity down even more here. I'll start with a very light figure, a light line that will indicate the entire figure. And I've got it basically going in whatever the long line of action is, and then I'll go in and start dividing it up. So I'll divide it in half so that we've got the upper torso. Maybe that could be a little higher. We've got the torso, and then we've got the legs. And since this line of action pretty much establishes the direction of the legs, I'll probably just go in here and finish it off such that I've got, you know, could really come out to this side a little bit more. And I'll just add on just a little line on the side to indicate the foot, and that I'm going to flesh that out into volumes, kind of the way that he shows here. And then I'll go and place the other foot just in relationship looking to where he's placing the foot on the figure. So this was basically, you know, where the foot's in the ground, and that's basically the heel. And then from here, I'll sort of jog up to the knee, and then up to the pelvis, and then going up here, basically approximating about where the shoulders are going to be. And then from there, I can go in one of two ways. And what I've been doing more recently is looking at the where the hand or the wrist is, and then going back to the elbow, and then up to the shoulder. But you can start from the shoulder and go down. And even though I've been testing out this whole method of trying to work my way in from the farthest extremities of the figure. That said, I will definitely switch back and forth if there's a point where just conceptually it's easier for me to figure out what the figure's doing by working my way outward from the middle. So when I say outward from the middle, I mean drawing from the torso out to work my way to where the limbs are placed, versus what I'm doing here where I'm finding the hand or the wrist or the ankle. And so I've got a stick figure here. The point of this is you see the simple construction that Walt Reed has here. And I draw this very simple stick figure before I go to that construction phase. It just helps me to give something to draw the forms around. For instance, if I draw just a random line going out this way, I can look at that line, and let's say it's an arm or a leg. Based on this direction of axis, I can then go, all right, if that's the general direction that I want to go, let me draw that limb going in this direction. And then let's say it's an arm that's raised. I might have it going back down towards the torso. And I can come in and say, all right, there's the, well, hang on. Just draw that. See, this is the interesting challenge here. Because I'm not using a brush that gives me as much opacity control as I would like. Normally, I would draw through, and actually I guess I can make a small line instead of a light line. When I'm drawing digitally, it feels like it's more important to me to really emphasize when we're looking at the underside of a surface versus the upper side. So this little circle right here, I would make an effort to not draw that in, only to reinforce the fact that we are looking at, on this cylinder that's behind that first the forearm that I drew, to make it very aware that we are looking down at this form. Whereas if I were drawing in charcoal, even though I would draw just the lower part of the cylinder, if I was drawing this in charcoal, I would very lightly still put in the other half of that there, just drawing through construction-wise. And so maybe that's something that I need to get used to, is not making it about opacity, but maybe do a really thin line, which can serve the same function. But my point being is that before diving in to the construction the way that Walt Reed has it here, I like to come in and start with getting these general volumes first. I mean, these general direction, the stick figure form of the drawing, before I go in and flesh it out with volumes, the way that Walt Reed has it here. And I'm showing this just so that you can understand my whole process of doing this study group is, again, it's not about making an exact replica of what Reed draws. It's about understanding the concepts that he has in the book. And if I need to draw things a little bit differently to make sure that I'm conveying that, then I will. Because either way, I'm ending up at the conceptual drawing that Walt Reed has here. And even though he doesn't, well, you know what? I was going to say that he didn't draw kind of an opening where the shoulder attaches, but he did. He just drew it very lightly, much like I'm talking about right here. That line, there's a very light line. If I zoom in, you can see it. right here, he does in fact indicate where he's cutting in to attach the shoulder. So I just drew that a bit darker than what he has there. And I'll tell you, this studying of Walt Reed has definitely been playing into my figure drawing sessions, the class that I take. Because I find myself a lot of times when I'm lately, when I'm doing my work in class or when I'm reviewing it, I'm trying to break it down. Let's make this a little darker. I'm trying to break it down into lines and simple cylinders and volumes like what we see here. And I find that it's helping me. It's improving what I'm doing in class. Because before you move on to adding anatomy, before you move on to adding tone and lighting, it's like if you don't understand these basic volumes, then whatever anatomical shapes you throw into an image, they're not going to work because they're not based on anything. You have to base them on anatomy. Needs to serve the basic construction. It's not that the construction serves the anatomy. I'll tell you, this figure that I drew, he's not leaning forward as much as Walt Reed has him. And that's something that I don't necessarily need to go back and correct, but I'm aware of it. And because I'm also trying to improve my sense of gesture, the fact that I observe that kind of makes me say, all right, I need to be a little bit more on point when I'm constructing these things, when I'm doing my that stick figure that I started with. I need to pay a little bit more attention to capturing not just proportion, but capturing the the gesture, the action. I definitely look at each of these studies. I mean, every drawing I do, I look at as an opportunity to practice volume and gesture. Because no matter what, you're always starting with those elements. I mean, whether you're drawing a building or a car, a dog, a spaceship. I mean, I don't know if landscapes have gesture per se, but landscapes do have a fundamental structure that you're trying to get. Maybe they have proportion that you're trying to get on the page. And all of those things are the core of these fundamentals that Walt Reed is trying to get down. You know, it's even changing the way I draw the knee, because prior to doing these studies, I've been drawing the knee very much as an object that is in between the upper leg and lower leg. But I haven't really been conveying the fact that it's more of something that rests between the joint. And it used to be that I would draw, the upper leg, and then the knee would go sort of built into it, as opposed to now I'm really drawing it where these two volumes are attached at the back end of the hinge, and the knee, if the leg is straight, then been switching to drawing the knee. I'm doing this little drawing on the side. Let's say this is a 3/4 front view of a leg. There's your ankle. The way I'm drawing the knee now is resting over that division. Whereas before I used to draw it like here's the leg, and drawing the condyles, drawing the knee, then drawing the shin bone, tibia. And the knee does rest on the tibia, but I've been drawing it much more as if there's more space in between here, instead of it being something that's resting over this gap, which I think is a flaw in how I've been conceiving the anatomy. And it's really just studying Walt Reed that changed this. That doesn't look good. So yeah, I'm basically going in here, and again, this is that practice of taking something that's simple, like just a fluted cylinder, larger at one end, smaller at the other, and modifying it so that you get that sense of the muscles attached. And again, thinking about volumes, we're not just looking at the heel, but we're looking at the underside of the heel. And if I were drawing this with tone, instead of drawing a construction of it, instead of drawing it with these hard lines, if I were actually trying to do this like a figure drawing, I would have done the edge in a soft line. Or maybe I would have done it the way I'm adding the underside of this the calf here. Maybe I would have drawn it with lines, but I would have drawn it with like broken lines. Not broken lines per se, but a little bit of feathering. So looking at this, Sometimes your early drawings when you first start up are a little bit rough. I'm looking at this and I'm seeing now my comparative. It's first off, it's really wonky that the arm that is closer to the viewer, the left arm, is not as thick as the right arm. That's one. Two, the head is a little bit small for this torso, both in height and in thickness. Three, this arm, the left arm, looks like it could be swung out or swung forward a little bit more, and maybe a little bit more foreshortened in the forearm. The right arm, again, lower, but also still more foreshortened in the forearm. And the long leg, it's not bad. It's a little bit out of proportion for the torso. In trying to get this torso to feel like it was really leaning forward, I've sort of foreshortened it, but it doesn't feel as long as it should. And it feels like there could be, again, some more foreshortening in both of these legs. So both of them should be, I think, a little bit shorter and just slightly more foreshortened. So I think I just overall I've got this figure a little bit too upright. He's not leaning in, doing as much of the action in the drawing as he should be. So, yeah, I could go back and redraw these, but instead I'm going to move on and draw some more. But I make notes of the places where I'm off. Oh, screw it. You guys know me. I can't resist. Let me just take one more stab at it. I mean, again, the whole point of this is showing you how I study. And the big part of the way I study is if I can't quite get it right, I like to try and do it again. So I think this time, drawing that stick figure, I'm going to try and really emphasize that foreshortening. You know, maybe part of the reason why I made the torso a little bit shorter is because when I'm used to thinking about the figure from the front, when I'm thinking about it from the front, you know, the front of the chest, you know, I think of that pit of the neck as sort of the end of it, and then the top kind of slopes backwards. Well, we're looking at the back, so we're looking at that area where it slopes backwards and slopes upward, meaning you know, the torso, really the rib cage, is taller in the back. in trying to get this figure to feel a little bit more aggressive in his posture, it's really reminding me of some of the drawings in How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way by John Buscema. It says by Stan Lee and John Buscema, but it's the art of John Buscema that really sells that book. And there's a whole section there where he shows you character poses, and he'll show you the pose basically the way I drew it the first time, where it's a little bit stiffer, and then he'll show you the pose where he really pushes it. And I will tell you, I've got that book as a digital PDF somewhere. Maybe it's high time I crack that bad boy open again. I have not looked at it in a long time. And the thing that I'm drawing right now looks like I could really use it. Yeah, I mean, even looking at this, I still feel like that long arc of the spine, I'm not getting that. I'm not getting it on the page there. Yeah, my torso is a lot shorter than his. In fact, I really do feel like I need to stretch that. Like I thought maybe I can just add a little bit to the front, but it's like, no. To feel like the way that drawing feels, Walt Reed's drawing feels, I really need some more torso there. I can't just give it a little bit. I gotta give it a lot. Yeah, trying to get this sense of the foreshortening here is definitely challenging. If we didn't want challenging, we wouldn't have gone into the arts, huh? I mean, I wonder if anyone really does go into this thinking, taking pictures all day, this is going to be a cakewalk. I find that hard to imagine. I generally think of it not so much about ease, but about fulfillment. I think I mentioned this in the regular public live stream this weekend about the art struggle. The idea that that the idea that we all have to suffer and fight. And I think that there is battle involved in making your craft grow and improve. But in the course of that battle, you can find a meditative peace, the peace of working out very hard, running a marathon. And the whole process feels much more like that to me than it is pure joy or pure, torture and anguish. The runner's high, that was what I equated it to in the public live stream. Speaking of somebody who's already getting tired. It is challenging doing a live stream after a full day of work, but one, you guys are worth it. Two, this kind of analysis is important. I think the only difference between this and what I'd be doing otherwise is I would be having dinner with my wife first, hanging out, spending a little couples time together, and then maybe when my wife gets a little bit tired, or after maybe watched a half hour TV, then I'm like, all right, I'm gonna retire to the art department, as we call it. See, this is the thing that gets me about this pose. Is that if I draw him upright, then he doesn't feel like he's really leaning into the pose. If I draw him leaning, it feels like he's too short. And I think I have figured out what I was doing wrong. And I'm not going to go here and draw the whole figure again. But looking at it now, sometimes that's what it takes, is 2 or 3 drawings to realize what you're doing wrong. In this case, it's the fact that I'm drawing him with too much foreshortening. I'm drawing him too much like we're looking a little bit off from a 3/4 view. Whereas what he's really doing is it's closer to 3/4. Point being is that what I'm trying to say is his torso is leaning more. I've been drawing that if you draw this leaning torso as if you're more behind him, so more of a back view than a three-quarter view, then you're going to get a view that's closer to what I've been drawing, which is either too short or you don't get the sense that he's leaning. If you're drawing him more from the side, a little bit more three-quarters, you can have it be the same height, but still get that length in there. So that is the mistake I made in both versions of this drawing. And now that I see that and have a better sense of it, I think I can let this go and move on to another one. So there's a small figure up top. So let's say that I've got this guy and that line that I just drew there, this eye, is the height of the whole figure. Now, let's start by saying his torso's there. I mean, the base of his torso, his pelvis is there. That I'm leaning to the left. I'm going to raise his foot up somewhat because his knee is raised up. This is one of those where I'm going back and forth between drawing from the pelvis out as opposed to pelvis in, because there's an interesting thing in here in that you've got the inside line of his thigh moving towards the outside and the outside one moving sharply in. You've got that joint in the center. You know what? I am going to erase this and draw it bigger because I don't think it really does you guys much good to see a really tiny. I was drawing it small because it's smaller than the other drawing. It's this figure that's over here. But I don't think that really does much good for you guys for me to draw it super tiny. So let's start again. So that's my demarcation of the figure, full height of the drawing, pelvis going up, pelvis tilting to the right, rib cage tilting to the left, knee coming forward, leg coming straight down but slightly out. So the whole thing is I'm paying attention to sort of both the stick figure and the silhouette. But I'm doing this with the knowledge that I am going to take that stick figure and I'm going to flush it out, fill it out, give it volume. So the fact that I can see, even on Reed's drawing, he's got the shoulder line drawn through lightly, and that shoulder line is going right through the middle of the head. So what that tells me is that, I mean, you can already see from the shape of the ellipse that makes the bottom of his torso, and the shape of the ellipse that's running around the middle of the figure, that his rib cage is turned towards you. He's tilting forward, he's leaning forward. So you're seeing the top of his shoulder. But that also gives you the space to throw the neck in there. Because normally the neck is coming up out of the shoulders. Now the top of the rib cage. So I'm going in here and enhancing that rib cage there. When I say enhancing, I start thinking about Blade Runner. And when Decker is going through and looking at those photos, searching for clues, he's got the little scanner. He's all enhance. Move over to this sector. Stop. Go back. I don't know how many of you have seen Blade Runner. It is a classic, but I remember when I was in college telling my my college girlfriend how awesome Blade Runner was. We were visiting her mother during a summer break or a winter break, and we rented it, and it was the theatrical cut with the voiceover, and they were watching it and they were just like, this is the hammiest, cheesiest movie ever. So I think the first time I saw it, I think the director's cut had already come out. Well, you know what? Maybe the director's cut didn't come out, but I just loved it even with the voiceover. That's actually probably the more likely of the two possibilities. Voiceover didn't bother me, whereas a lot of people really do say that the voiceover kind of killed the theatrical cut of Blade Runner. I get that. I was drawing the. It's interesting in that Reed, because this is sort of a mannequin type figure, he doesn't necessarily draw the shoulder in the way I do. Like when I'm in figure drawing class, I am acutely aware of how much the shoulders cut in to the torso. Like it's like when I'm drawing them, I'm generally drawing like, here's your rib cage. It's like this, and the shoulders are like this big mass that's separate. So that's how I draw it when I'm drawing figure drawing. But for the purposes of studying Reed, he's not necessarily drawing the figure that way. He's drawing it more like the shoulders are just sort of stuck on. And he's giving you more shoulder in the rib cage. He's giving you shoulder as part of the torso, as opposed to the way that I have been taught, and the way that I actually do think is correct from actual observation. But I've always been taught in figure drawing classes to think of the shoulder as part of the arm, not part of the torso. Yeah, I'm looking at this, and I did not get the foreshortening. I did not pull it off. There's more foreshortening going on here. And he is giving a little bit more of that shoulder connection than I was giving him credit for. I have to remind myself to ease up on my grip here. I'm kind of falling into my bad habits, my old habits of pressing a little bit too hard and gripping the pencil too hard when I'm trying to force the drawing along. And you know, I might be responding to the fact that this week in figure drawing class we were drawing a particularly muscular model, because I'm noticing also that this figure that I'm drawing here is a lot beefier than the figure that Walt Reed drew. And even though I'm not really focused on the muscles, I think accurately depicting the character of the figure is important. So if the character of the figure is more muscular, then I should get that. If it's a little bit more lithe and panther-like, I should capture that as well. And in this case, I think Reed is doing something that is the mark of a master draftsman, which is he's making this person athletic, but normal athletic. And I don't think that is, you know what, maybe it's a sign of the fact that I have grown up with comic book art as my major influence. But I feel like the desire to really take an athletic pose like this and really like kind of Hulk him out, make him with big rippling muscles, huge broad shoulders. I think that that's a function of modern illustration and modern comics, the instinct to depict muscles and anatomy in that way. Whereas I think looking historically at art, even when you've got, you know, rippling muscles of figures drawn by Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel, or you've got these Adonis gods, like hell, even Adonis specifically, in a Bouguereau mythological painting. That historically figurative anatomy drawing and painting leans towards the naturalistic as opposed to the overly idealized. Like, I think when you look at something like Greek Hellenistic statues, That's where superhero anatomy starts. It starts at that level. As opposed to that being sort of the most exaggerated that artists would push anatomy in terms of like the larger art world. So that's also something for me to think about is capturing more of the character of the figure here. I mean, I've caught the pose, I've caught the gesture, but I haven't caught the character. That is something that I am missing in this drawing. And that happens. He's kind of got his little thumb out. Like he's doing a little thumbs up. Not sure what's going on there with this thumb. But yeah, I definitely made this guy a little bit too barrel-chested. And also, I think that I really exaggerated that tweak in terms of this leaning forward, this leaning to the left. The way that I've got the rib cage twisted here, I am drawing it such that here's your rib cage tilted on this axis. Then I've got your pelvis down here tilted at this axis. And the way that that Reed seems to have conceived it, even though there is a twist here, he's kind of got it where here's your pelvis, and he's not creating so much of this gap. It's more that the body is twisting from down here. I think it's a subtle distinction, but it's one that's worth making because it's a matter of how you're conceiving the volumes. And he is drawing this as a much more united volume. As opposed to me drawing it where there's a segment that is the pelvis, a segment that is the rib cage, and a lot of floating in between. And I also don't think I got enough leaning to the left. Like if I were to draw a line straight up from the hip, shoot that straight up, on my drawing it's going right through the shoulder. If you draw a line from the hip here, it's going up through the neck, meaning his whole body. In fact, you see it even hits the rib cage right here. So again, little things that I am catching. And I'm trying to train myself. Part of me doing this and calling it out during the practice is me saying, all right, what am I missing during my gesture phase. And it's stuff like, okay, where does the shoulder line up? The shoulder lines up just a little bit on the other side. The right shoulder lines up with kind of the center of the pelvis. So if I drop a line down here, maybe that's a question of how broad-shouldered this guy is. Maybe he's broader shouldered than I've drawn him, and I haven't given him that credit because the left shoulder is correct. The right shoulder is correct. The left shoulder is not. But also, it's two things. Because as I'm looking at it, yes, there's a slight curve in, and then it comes out more. Whereas I did this with the pelvis coming dramatically in and then going dramatically out. So there's a bigger bow here, when what's really happening is slightly in, significantly out. That's what's really occurring. So you know what? Observations. It's part of what this is sketching, being aware, making corrections. I'm just gonna take one more stab at him at kind of a stick figure level. And I'll tell you, this is one of those things where even though I try to be really judicious about proportion, it's one of those things where that stick figure that I tend to draw at the beginning might not be working here. Might not be helping me as much as I feel like it should. That whole shoulder I drew in. This is another thing. Now that I'm paying attention to all these things, I'm looking like kind of a cross measurement. And I'm like, all right, the shoulder is going to be below. If I'm just making a horizontal line, it's going to be below there. Shoulder should be starting out here or down here. Just trying to capture. Not capture, but catch these mistakes. And the fact that, again, drawing across, all right, that ends at the pelvis. I'm not way off, but little higher. Should be a little higher than I drew it. And also drawing this line across, I can see that where the shoulder ends on that side, it starts on this side. When I do this thing of drawing a plumb line for measurement, the challenge is making sure I actually do make it vertical as opposed to slashing diagonal, which I do sometimes. But point being is it's a little bit farther, partway down the thigh. Of course, I feel like this thigh could be out a little bit farther as well. Not a whole lot farther. I'm back to what I was saying before. Remember how when I started, I was like, it's not going to help you guys at all watching me draw this thing super tiny. Now I'm drawing it super tiny. Got to push this shoulder up a little bit. You know, and I'm also realizing part of the reason why the figure felt so like bulky and massive is because in my superhero-esque proportions, I was drawing his head smaller, too small for normal figurative proportions. Like I was drawing him like a 9 heads high figure. Whereas I think I'm actually going to flip back in Walt Reed to take a quick look. Because he might be drawing 7.5 head high figures, which is the average human proportion. I tend to use 8 because I learned that from Carl Ganas. It's just simpler to divide the figure up if you're using 8 head high proportion. But yeah, he's still a little clunky, but this one is a lot closer to that thumbnail than the large drawing that I did. Let me flip back here. Does this thing have an index? No, it just has a table. Pardon me, table of context. Text, table of contents. So he's got both a 7 head and an 8 head division in here. If you go to page 12 of Walt Reed, he's got a 7 head figure, and he says this is the actual average. And he says the ideal figure is 8 times the height of the head. And what he actually says in here is, I'll notice that although the total height of this 8 head figure is the same as the 7 head, the head has been reduced in the 8 head figure. All the other parts have been elongated proportionally so that the figure now seems slim and graceful. So yeah. And he even says in here, the 8 head figure is the set of proportions upon which we will base most of the instruction in this book. So there we go. He says any departure from the 8 head formula should be deliberate. All right. So who knows? Maybe I'm talking crack, smoking crack about, claiming that his figure is a 7.5 head. Maybe his figure is an 8 head figure, and I drew like a 9 or a 10 head. It's possible. All right. Last figure on this page. We'll move to the next page here. And there's something tricky about drawing a figure at an angle you don't normally see them. So I'm still going to stick with that same concept of dividing the figure when I start with lines like this, I'm always trying to be aware. If I'm doing a figure doing with something like a handstand like this guy's doing, I have to leave room beyond the head. But my goal is still to make that line be the head plus the torso. And he's giving you a nice little sense of twist, not twist, but the bending in that line curving away at the end of the rib cage. And then instead of following that, you've got the pelvis making the same kind of curve, giving you that sense that he's bending slightly. And I will tell you, I drew this. I'm going to cheat here, and I'm going to shrink this down a little bit because I didn't leave room for the feet. Although generally I don't think of any changes like that. You know, there's no real cheating in art, except for just stealing someone else's art and calling it your own. Other than that, it's like if you got a tool that'll let you correct a mistake very simply, you'd be a fool not to use it. It's like saying using an eraser is cheating. You know, and maybe there are artists that have such rigid standards of process, and it's not for me to tell people how they should or should not make art or what their standards should be. I think that, you know, equating, just digitally manipulating things, moving them over, I think that is a harsh standard to consider that cheating. It's the whole reason why we have these tools. I think there might have been a time when I was younger, when digital art first existed, that I might have considered it cheating. But, given the fact that I'll do stuff like, just putting tracing paper down to do my simple sketches, to work out my basic volumes. I certainly don't consider that cheating. And I look at all of these digital tools as just an extension of mechanical devices that we might have used. To help us correct drawing flaws. Now, I'll tell you, I got caught up in the habit, or in the process here, of copying what I'm looking at instead of analyzing what I'm looking at. So when I do that, I find that I frequently get drawings that are very stiff. So we'll see how this feels as I go in here. try to make corrections and adjustments. Turn up the opacity a little bit. Say the difference in terms of drawing a pose like this is that you don't necessarily have the advantage of doing the level of measurements, comparative measurements that I did with the other poses, where I can just draw a line, a plumb line running up or down the figure or across the figure to say, well, does this line up with this other part of the anatomy? Because it's so vertical. That really, when it comes to looking at adjustments, the adjustments that I could consider making are pretty minor. Like, I mean, I'm noticing that the hand, this whole arm, could be out here more. Yep, see, that's the problem. The minute I see something, I'm like, all right, now I gotta fix it. So if I go in here, erase this hand, erase this forearm, and now I come back and I'm like, all right, continue this. Start by just connecting that all as one fluid line, and then coming in here and doing the same, and erasing the stuff that fights against that. So I guess there is stuff that I can garner or adjust by looking across vertically or horizontally. And something that I've never done or was never forced to do in school, in high school, or any art class really. I was listening to a podcast where they were talking about art exercises, and I can't remember whether it was the Draftsman podcast with Stan Prokopenko and Marshall Vandruff, or whether it was 3-Point Perspective with the SVS Learn guys. But one of them was talking, of one of those podcasts, they were talking about the idea of having to draw the negative space. Not drawing the figure, but drawing the space around them, the silhouette. And how it really helped improve conception of volumes. I can even see right here a nice little tone that Reed dropped in there, kind of signify that transition from the back to the side of the figure. Very subtle. right here. It's interesting that he put that in there. And the fact that I'm not really using tone with this particular brush has me thinking, all right, well, how do I want to denote that with this particular tool? And I could either drop the opacity, or I can do like this and just do a broken line. I mean, it's a light enough thing. I didn't even notice it drawing at the beginning. It's a light enough thing that I don't have to address it. But I think that it does add something by addressing it. And that's something that I'm constantly on the lookout for, are subtleties. Because I don't think I'm a particularly subtle artist. I think I draw everything with a sledgehammer. Or perhaps a chainsaw. My buddy Carl Altstetter once told me that I pencil with a feather and I ink with a chainsaw. In terms of the level of finesse that I go at the page with. I mean, I do tend to use large, bold, chunky lines when I'm inking with a brush. And again, here, I'm just taking the concept of the cylinder and just modifying it. There's a diagram that Andrew Loomis has in Figure Drawing for All It's Worth, where he shows you, I think it's a diagram on foreshortening, but he draws like a like an S-shaped figure. And he tries to explain to you I'm going to put an end point on this. Well, he tries to show you that it's a simple cylindrical form that's twisting and turning and maybe getting wider at some places and then getting narrower. I think that's the thing that I'm missing here in this, is that he has to get narrower, then he's got to get bigger. But that concept of, and the fact that I'm drawing it turning here, I've got turning now, and it's coming towards us again. This isn't the diagram now. Now this is just me freestyling. But the point being is that it would behoove, I think, this is something that I'm mentioning for my edification. But I think for anybody who's actually doing these studies alongside me and exploring form and volume, it would behoove you to get into the habit of thinking about both basic, simple cylinders like, okay, here's the calf, and it's a cylinder. Rather the entire lower leg, not just the calf. It's a cylinder, and you're looking at the top of it, and then being able to say, all right, it's a cylinder, but it's wider towards the far end, but then gets narrow again right at the end. Much like that looping snake thing I just drew. May get it getting wider and wider around the calf, and then narrowing again. And being able to do that to depict volume, I think will help making drawings feel volumetric, more volumetric. And I'll tell you, this isn't necessarily a bad adaptation of what Reed drew. Walt Reed drew here. Pardon me. But like I said before, I can get real stiff in terms of, if I'm just copying the drawing. Instead of, say, trying to really get that gesture. That feels a little stiff for me. Don't love it. All right. I'm going to group these together and start another drawing. Do that. Select all these, group them, hide them. All right, so the next section, he's got drawing the basic form figure. So what he's trying to show you really is how he goes from a gesture drawing, and it's not too different from the stick figure that I started out with. He's drawing a stick figure as well, and he's just filling out the torso and a little bit of volume in the legs. But yeah, it's basically just him drawing a stick figure. He's doing what I do. That whole thing of me saying in that very first one how I needed the stick figure before I could add the cylinders. He puts the stick figure in there. So for all I know, all of the drawings he's got in here, he's got the volumes, those may all be cleaned up. I don't know. Maybe. What's he say here? It says, the drawings on these 2 pages show you how to get started drawing the basic figure. The first step is to study the model or photograph which you are about to draw. Lay in a preliminary sketch that indicates size, proportion, and gesture or action. The lines don't have to be exact. As you begin to draw, they're simply starters, many of which will be either covered up or erased at the end of the drawing. Now, this is an interesting thing. He mentions the thing I was talking about drawing stiff drawings. He says, he says, work freely in a relaxed and informal way. Sketch the basic forms over your first lines. He said, draw in pencil. Don't hesitate to erase or change if necessary. It's a mistake to freeze or tighten up sketches too quickly. It says, try to feel the action. Above all, keep the solidity of the form in mind as you draw. This is the best way to create the illusion of three-dimensional figures. Do not begin to draw clothing and other details until you're satisfied your basic figure is correct. Those are words I live by, son. So let's scoot this over here. And on this one, I mean, hell, I can pretty much just copy direct. Not copy, because, like I said, I'm trying to not copy. But what I am trying to do is I can just work in the form as opposed to, me pointing out there's an extra step that I had. He's showing you that extra step. And it's interesting to me that, maybe because it might throw people off if he had a whole section just on gesture at the beginning. Oh, wait a minute. Let me see what he says about gesture at the start of the book. Movable parts, proportions, construction, or shortening. Gesture drawing. I think this came up in one of the older sessions when I had Negro Fazetta on here. He doesn't have gesture drawing does not come up in this book again until 132. We're on page 38. Oddly enough, gesture, which is what we all start with, he doesn't get into gesture drawing until 132. And when he does, It's even looser than the drawing that he's got on this page. So I do find it interesting that he doesn't start with gesture. That, I would say, actually is a little bit of a shortcoming, in my opinion. I'm kind of approaching this like a marker sketch, really going low in the opacity. So I'm going broader, but lower opacity. Super light. Make this a little bit lower so I've got room for that hand that's above the head. So I've got this up here. Got that one slashing line from the top of the head all the way down to his foot, the underside of the foot. What's interesting is, the guy's got on this jock strap. That jock strap actually kind of helps with the drawing. Let's see here. That shoulder, I'm not going to go from the outside of the shoulder. I'm going to kind of look sort of the inside. It kind of lines up with the knee. So let's say got that up here. It's got a nice powerful stretch. I'm looking at that arm. The hand is around the base of the pelvis. His elbow, there's a lot of foreshortening there because his elbow is just not too far above the waistband. And sometimes I worry when I'm doing things like this that I'm stopping the energy too much by narrating as I'm going. And that's not to say that I don't want to be drawing here in front of you guys or I shouldn't be. It's simply that I made a note to myself on during my figure drawing studies, and again, referring to this weekend's public live stream. I was correcting some my drawings from that class, and I had a note on there for myself to start each pose with a tack. Really coming in there and kind to aggressively document the gesture. And I will say that it is difficult to be aggressive when you're narrating at the same time. It's like, I'm going to come into this. It's almost like, if I were being a little kid, drawing a comic book and I was going, and just, saying, kind of narrating doing drawings of like a dinosaur destroying a city, or whatever it is that I'm drawing. Just the idea of being aggressive in capturing those basic elements. Reminding myself to really come in there and go for it. Try to feel whatever the vitality of the figure, whatever the vitality of their motion is. Now at this point, I'm blocking in those volumes, and I think at this point I'm blocking in probably with more anatomy than Reed would probably recommend. Come in there and see again me and my superhero proportions. Look at the size of the head that I'm drawing versus the size of the head that Walt Reed is drawing. A much more normal proportion figure. And this is probably good practice for me to sometimes draw some figures and say these are more normal proportions. And that thing that I mentioned about drawing the rib cage or drawing the shoulders separate. Reed's doing that as well. All right, I think I can bring my brush size down and my opacity up. And basically come in here and do the type of tightening that I normally would do at this stage. Interesting, he doesn't even really bother giving us much of a hand on the left hand here. He's just got like a little nub where it ends. Again, this is something where it's interesting that the differences between what I'm doing here versus what I do in figure drawing class, because I tend to, in figure drawing class, really go in there and draw more of what's going on with the deltoid, not the deltoid, the trapezius that's sitting on the upper part of the back, and the shoulder blades, because while he definitely gives you a sense of the major volumes of the figure, there's no mention of the shoulder blades in this drawing. And by mention, I just mean visual indication of the shoulder blades. That's just not part of the drawing here. I think he's doing a good job of, I love just the fact that I'm arrogant enough to say I think he's doing a good job here, but getting the the differentiation in the buttocks of the fact that there's overlap between the left and right butt cheek, overlap that indicates the right leg moving toward the viewer in space. Whereas the left leg is moving away from the viewer in space. That dimensional movement is one of the things that it took me a long time to get into my head, to think about these volumes not just moving up, down, left, right, but really thinking about how they look in space, in three-dimensional space. You know, sometimes I had to tell myself to try and pretend that I'm drawing, like when I was drawing figures in class, I was mentally telling myself, pretend you are reaching into the paper. And I think that actually is a good tool mentally. Now, as I'm looking at this, I feel, I'm going to back up a few lines, because I feel like there should be some more foreshortening here. I realized that I stretched that calf out to make it, make it a little bit longer. But really, it's not that the calf was too short. It's that the upper leg was not foreshortened enough. And now I'm actually starting to draw a little bit more anatomy, I think, than Reed is getting into. Because I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about the fact that I can see the mass of muscles on the side, the quadriceps kind of bulging out along the sides. But I don't think that this particular drawing needs that. I can kind of just cap off. I do want to fix this a little bit because I've been drawing my calves a little bit evenly instead of drawing them the way they really are, which is on the outside, it is both higher and lower in terms of starting higher up. And then on the inside, it starts a little bit lower, bulges out more, and then comes in and finishes higher than the outside. It's a matter of just reminding myself, as I'm constantly doing here, observe is what I'm drawing, actually what I'm trying to express here. And I don't have to, but I kind of want to go in here and give a little bit of tone, line as tone, to indicate the underside of that rib cage. You know, and he doesn't even get into a sense of the bone shape of the skull. You know, the skull is more than just, you know, a flat ball. There's a lot going on with the skull. When you get to this section in here, on drawing heads, he gets into it. This hand definitely goes up higher than I've got it here. Not way higher, but higher. It's so simple, the way he's just got the hands and fingers there, and the thumb. Pouring out. Yeah, I definitely, years of reading and drawing comics has infected my my sense of anatomy and proportion, because I'm looking at this figure and just looking at the actual photo of the guy. My every instinct is really like to push those lats to make those bigger. It does bother me, that hand that he's got there. I want to give him just a little bit more. All right. I don't think I need to do more with this. I showed you basically me starting off doing a simple gesture that that Reed puts in, and then fleshing it out to the same mannequin that Reed draws. And I think I like his mannequin more than I like Andrew Loomis's mannequin, because Andrew Loomis's mannequin really has the shoulders almost like a cape laying over the rib cage. And as you can see here, you know, he's making that larger distinction between the rib cage and the shoulders, and that is all how I have been taught to interpret the shoulders. So let's see. We're already at 8:46, but having, you know, a little bit more than an hour. Maybe about an hour, depending on if I can stop yawning. But I might need to bring in another page from Walt Reed into this. Bring a couple more pages in here to look at. Because I've got one more page queued up. Select and group these, hide those. Last page, and again, he's got that gesture, and then the figure. The gesture and then the mannequin. Move these up here. Let me zoom in and see what he's talking about. He says, whether you're drawing a male or female figure, use the same basic approach. First sketch in free-flowing lines that indicate the gesture. Then look for proportions. Note the way the shoulders and hips tilt, which way the head is turned. Note the characteristic differences between male and female figures. The female shoulders are narrow and sloping, hips wide. The male is broad-shouldered and relatively narrower hips. So, go in here. And again, to do my loose sketching, I'm going to make my brush significantly larger. Drop my opacity down. I think that works for me line-wise. Now I'm going to try and not look at his gesture drawing, because for me, again, gesture is very much more stick figure-y. So I'm just going to try and get a long line going from the top of the head down to the foot. Now this is the foot that's back. And what I'm doing here is I'm drawing a line across to where the other foot is, and noting that that foot, where the feet end, the toes end, on this other leg, the ankle starts right there. So there's still this extra bit of business. If I go up here to the ankle, I can then, the other ankle, the ankle that's back, from here, I'll say, all right, you just block in the bottom of the pelvis, and I can come and go up to the knee, up to the thigh, come back down, knee, to the ankle. From the center now, even though I drew a line going up to the top of the head, I'm going to shift over now. He's got a line just running right up the middle, and actually I could do the same thing. I went over here to start a line running up the center, but he's kind of, if I were to have just continued that inside of the thigh line, it kind of does the same thing. But like you said, keep it free-flowing, keep it loose. In this case, my instinct is to just drop this line back down and then hook it in. But one of the things that I've been trying to do, I'm going to undo that only because it's a nice line. I like it, but if I can't replicate it, then I'm not much worth my salt. But what I'm trying to do instead is look at where the hand is. This is one of those things that said for helping me with proportion. And it looks like the hand, right about the bottom of the pelvis, is where the hand is resting. Like it's kind of dead center in the middle. So if I go from here and then from there, curving up. And also noting if the hip is out here, the shoulders may be narrower, but it looks like the shoulder is about there. Her other shoulder arcing across and actually out as far as the other hip. So it almost looks like her waist comes in a bit, then back out. Now with the other hand, that hand is way out past, in terms of like horizontal distance, that hand is way out past the foot. In fact, even the elbow is past the foot. So let's say that hand is way out here. I may look and say, and that's another thing. I could say, all right, let's just draw an arc. If her hand is out, her hand isn't just going straight to the right, it's also going back. So if I just draw an arc out that way, her hand is somewhere along that arc. The wrist, because the wrist basically, much like this one, the wrist is usually about at the base of the pelvis, and then the hand is below that. So if that's her pelvis, and I just swing that's a little trick there for proportion, for finding stuff. It's just doing these arcs of motion. So if I just look at I could just say, all right, here's the angle of the hand. That's where the wrist is. I'm doing this. There's multiple ways to do this. I could, from here, again, keep trying to figure out about where the hand is positioned, or once I know where the arc of movement is, I can just say, all right, what angle visually does the hand, the arm appear to be at? It's going straight. And if it appears to be traveling at that angle, and the shoulder is here, and the arc is there, it's just to connect the dots. And if I now come back across, it looks like the wrist in here should end up somewhere near where the navel is. And if I move a line across, I can't see her navel because it's dark in there. And actually, women's navels, I think, rest higher than men's. I think men's navels are a little bit lower. Damn it. It's driving me nuts. Now I gotta go grab a book. Gotta grab actually, let me take a look. I don't know if Reed covers it. I know that I have multiple art books, and every anatomy book has something they talk about differences between male and female anatomy. Let me see if he specifically talks about differences between male and structural differences between male and female. So we already covered that. That's on page 16. So come back here. He's talking about structure. So he's talking the bones. He doesn't get into surface anatomy. He does not mention belly buttons, the navel. But I am fairly certain that one of my books will have something about whether the navel is higher or lower. And I believe that the navel is higher on women, but I could be wrong. Joint heads, that's the hand, figure of motion, mood symbols for shortening, twisting. All right. Let me grab my anatomy book. Atlas of Anatomy, Human Anatomy for the Artist, Stephen Peck. Let's see here. Surface landmarks. That's page 180. Distinctions of sex. That's 224. So let me look at 224 first, and then I'll look at 180. See if either one, which one has the answer. So 224. So sadly, they don't. Okay, they do have photos. I thought they would have drawings here, but let's see, in the trunk, shorter and wider, the pelvis, sacrum, inguinal ligaments, joints, the difference between the buttocks. The navel is more deeply set, but it doesn't for females than males. It does mention the buttocks reach lower than the male buttocks, but it does not say anything about the navel other than it being more deeply set. But in terms of the actual position, it doesn't make a difference. At least, no, I'm not saying it doesn't make a difference. I'm saying this book does not make a distinction. Collarbones, cartilage. I know, I'm just naming off body parts here. It's because I'm trying to scan this and find the answer real quick. It's got a couple of nice drawings, nice photo reference. Yeah, but looking at this, comparing the yeah, there's not a huge difference. It does look like actually the male pelvis is higher. It looks like it's the woman's pelvis that is lower. But not pelvis. The woman's navel. It appears the woman's navel is lower. In fact, I will tell you a book that I think has a great distinction, and will probably have the answer. Well, there's a diagram in here that shows the navel as being kind of dead center in between the base of the pelvis, the bottom of the rib cage, and it looks like it's about the same for women. Yeah, for both men and women, it's about the middle. A half a head up, let's say. My major point in mentioning it, that was a whole tangent. It was really not necessary for this. I just wanted to know if the wrist lined up. Round out this rib cage and have it go a little bit higher. And I will tell you, he does a nice thing. Well, he's not really doing anything. He's really just drawing what he sees with the model. But I noticed just how long and elegant this model's neck is. And I point that out because from doing figure drawing, a lot of the models that we have in figure drawing class have long, elegant necks, and that's because they are models for figure drawing. And even though we tend to have a lot of diverse body types, I feel like what I tend to see in figure drawing classes is more definitely longer necks than the average person. Much like I said, I'm not drawing the average. I'm falling into the habit of not drawing the average figure. I tend to draw towards the idealized. I would say that definitely the models in figure drawing classes that I tend towards are a bit more idealized. And it's funny because when I think about it now, we definitely did not have idealized figures when I was in college. College, which I felt actually did not, figure drawing was not necessarily a thing that draftsmanship was not particularly important in the program that I was in. It was definitely more of a conceptual program. And there, I think we had an even wider diversity of body types that we drew, ages. And I think what's interesting here is I'm going to deviate, and I'm going to see it might bite me in the ass, but I'm looking at the drawing, the photo reference, and in the photo reference, it feels like the left leg is coming slightly towards the viewer. Slightly, ever so slightly. Whereas Reed draws that figure, draws that leg, as it appears moving away. All right, at this point, I think I can move to a darker tone and kind of refine this this figure a little bit. It's weird, and I try to keep a mental note of what I tend to set these things. So for sketching things in loosely, I'll have the brush set to kind of right about in the middle of the slider in Procreate. And let me move this down so you can actually see the. Oh no, I would have to move my whole screen with a little head there. But trust me, right about here, right below where my head is the top of the slider. Anyway, I try to keep dimension-wise when I'm just blocking things in right about the middle, and then I move the bottom slider. This is like 8-10% opacity. That's where I'm at, like 10%. Size. It actually says brush size 22%. So what is 50? 50 is all the way up here. That's so weird. 50 is right here. 100 is there. It's odd, yet. Oh, well, I guess it gives you a little space that as you get lower and lower, it gives you more control. Whereas with this, with the opacity, it's pretty much right in the middle is 50%. You know, quarter of the way down is 25%. You know, towards the bottom. So it's interesting. They changed the proportions, the scale for the different sliders. The opacity scale is a 1-to-1 scale. The brush size scale is proportional as you get smaller to let you refine how much you want to have. My point being is that for doing detail, I'll flip it, where I'm now moving to like 50% opacity and moving my brush down to like, this is like 2%, much smaller. Okay, that's too small. Even that's a little small. Say somewhere around a third of the way. Because that'll also encourage me, by keeping the brush slightly larger than I want, it'll encourage me to use a light touch to keep the brush small. Because this way I can get a nice thick line if I want to, and make something feel either bold or in shadow. But as a default, it is helpful to me to reinforce good habits by keeping that brush slightly larger. So I have to draw slightly lighter. I'm always thinking about that bad habit I have, being heavy-handed. And much like I use, charcoal pencil, because it is dark and I have to use a light touch with it. Working in Procreate, I'm finding that brush size is somewhat standing in for opacity. I mentioned this on, not here on this live stream, but in the public live stream. I think I mentioned one time I was drawing digitally and I started messing around with my brush settings because I have tried in the past to create a brush that works like this current brush that I'm using, but gives me opacity based on pressure. And you can have size based on pressure. You can make a custom brush that will work with size based on pressure. Make a custom brush that will work on opacity based on pressure. But when you try to do both, I'm sure there's somebody out there who's better at creating custom brushes than I am and can really get both well. I could not. And again, as much as I'm drawing digital now, and I think I'm making a comic digitally. That's one of the things about traditional, that ability to capture both pressure and opacity. Drawing with charcoal pencil, I can very much get a nice, I can get a light, broad tone, or I can get a thick, narrow line. I can control both opacity and brush size in traditional tools much easier. I don't want to say much easier. It's still a learned skill, but when working digitally, unless somebody creates a brush, it could be one of those things where because I don't spend a lot of time, I spend almost no time customizing my brushes. I go in, I find the brushes that work exactly the way I want them to, and I use those brushes, and occasionally, I'll come in, I'll tweak the settings a little bit. But overall, I really don't, excel at customizing brushes in any tool, Photoshop, Illustrator, Procreate, what have you. And right here, I am very specifically making a distinction between Reed's leg going back in space. That thing I mentioned before about drawing this knee like it's coming forward in space. The left leg. I'm definitely going for that and calling it out a bit more. Now I'm getting a little bit too anatomical here in terms of I really started going for getting the calf in that drawing. I don't think that's necessary. Just trying to give you just enough anatomy and I am drawing her. I tend to draw women a bit more. I've been told that I draw women more realistically, I guess because being in a figure drawing class, when we're drawing from live, live human beings, I tend to look at even though I'm drawing kind of superhero proportions, I tend not to draw women super skinny. That's just something that I think one of the big positives of doing figure drawing is that your women tend to look like real women as opposed to looking like, stick figure waisted anime girls. Doesn't mean that they're not slender, but I tend to draw women with a little bit more structure. And I think because I draw complex again, I do default a little bit to drawing them probably a little bit more muscular. I think that my women default to, Wonder Woman Amazonian as opposed to, waif-like. The comic book artist Michael Turner, I guess he's fresh in my mind, so I was listening to a podcast about him the other day. But he draws these, drew, because he's passed away, he's no longer with us, but he drew these. I liked his artwork, it was enjoyable, but the proportions of his female figures and his males were sort of ridiculous in terms of how skinny his female characters were. I'm petting the line a little bit much. Petting the line means drawing it with multiple passes to make one smooth line, as opposed to just having the confidence to draw a long line and say, "Screw it, that's the line, that's the shape." It's another thing that it would behoove me to get more confident at. And speaking of personal tastes, it looks to me like Reed has a penchant for drawing very long lower legs, at least on this particular model. I feel like what I drew here, and again, we all have propensities, and again, it also may be that Reed feels like these the more waifish proportions are more attractive. So I'm not saying that he's doing anything wrong here, but what I am saying is that I feel like the proportions that I'm drawing, to me, feel, yeah, she's definitely meatier. And again, I drew the head too small. She's definitely more Amazonian than the model in the photograph. But I feel like he kind of goes a little bit in the other direction. And my fingers are not pointing in the same direction as the fingers of that either. Well, I'd say that they're not pointing in the same direction as Reed's drawing there, but they're also not pointing in the same direction. I can't really tell. The photo kind of cuts off at the hand. All right. So yeah, me and my two small, tiny heads. You know what? For shits and giggles, let's lasso this and scale it up. Freehand. Let's just scale this head up. Not a whole lot. That should be enough. Yeah, now it feels a bit more in proportion with the photograph. He still draws her with legs that if I'm looking, hell, let's just do the comparison. And in fact, this time I'm gonna just draw this. Let's say, okay, here, this line, whoops, let's just say, here's the shin, okay? Let me lasso it. First off, before I lasso it, let me zoom in. If I lasso this and I move it up, I don't want to scale it, I just want to move it up. Look at that. Even if I move it down here and say that the knee is all part of the upper leg, it's like you've got that leg going almost all the way up to her navel. So I do not feel like I'm out of bounds looking at Reed and saying, nah, that upper thigh is too short. So I could see, like, if it was just like maybe this much, I don't think that's weird. Sometimes, people have, women particularly will have, men and women, maybe that hip will go up higher, up to here. Now, true, the actual bone of the leg is coming out down here. But the actual bone, the great trochanter, is level with the bottom of the pelvis. So really, it's down here. But even if I were to say, right, let's say that great trochanter is up here, but still look at how far below where the knee is that line is. So yeah, it's rare for me to get that cocky, but I got to call Reed out on that one. I'm like, that's not the stuff. That ain't it, Holmes. Sorry. All right. We're at 9:20. I think I've got time to go into one more page, but I don't know for sure. I don't think I have another page queued up. So let me take a look at what's next in this book. Ooh. It's got him analyzing some great works of art. Degas, Picasso, Joseph Hirsch. It says, good basic forms help to make convincing pictures. So what he does here, and this is something that, you've seen me do this when I'm studying Michelangelo or other artists, where I will go and I will try to do these volumetric studies, these mannequins. He does the same thing. He's drawing these mannequin studies of great works of art. And I need to move my iPad so I can capture an image here without getting a shadow. So I'm going to grab a quick image capture of these last two pages and bring those into Procreate so you guys can see what I'm working from. So let's see here. Take this. Get some HDR. There's a cat behind me yowling. Just lighten that just a tiny bit. And then let's move to the next page. That's an interesting thing. I never noticed that. I get better photo if I actually turn the book a little bit. All right. Khaleesi's getting upset. She's saying you're spending too much time drawing. You should have had this. She's criticizing me. She's like, you should have had these already queued up and ready to go. Can't keep people waiting like that. And she's right. She's right. Nevertheless, bring a couple of these into Procreate. Okay, that's one. Let me go in here. Yeah, the HDR images just look a little bit better. All right. So a couple more pages to look at here. Pop back over to Procreate. First off, let's group these. You guys can't see this right now, but literally, you know what? I want you to see what I'm seeing. Hang on. Why are you so crabby? This is what I'm looking at right next to me. Oh, Khaleesi is in a mood. And now she's sulking because I'm making fun of her. All right. I should do a drawing of this at some point. All right, let's get back to the study room. Add that other photo. Oh, I just added the same photo twice. Okay. So what he's done here, what Reed has done is, whoops, let's move these over. Enlarge slightly. You know what? I think this is going to be one of those scenarios where I come in and copy and then paste it larger so you guys can see what I'm doing better. Here we go. Copy, paste. Turn this layer off. All right. So the image here is from Degas. And it is just a woman having her hair done. Very simple. You know, that whole thing of people talking about, like, oh, my kid could do that. I look at this, and this does look like a drawing that, if I had had that sense of concept of volume. My understanding of volumes was not that as good when I was in high school. But looking at this picture, I look at that and I say, all right, the diagram that that Reed does next to this, that diagram looks like something that that I probably could have done in high school. And I say that just to make the point that he's keeping it super simple. Oh, I was wondering why. Okay, the opacity was all the way up and the brush size was large because that was on the eraser tool. This, bring this opacity down, brush size way up, that opacity way, way down. I'm going to start by just saying, all right, because it's a seated pose, I'm going to make that line to measure the pelvis. I mean, measure top of the head to the bottom of the pelvis, the torso. Now, knowing that the knees are about halfway out, I'm going to go, all right, this line should be about the same distance as that line, but it's at an angle. It's coming towards the viewer slightly. Let's see if I can bring this opacity down even more. Coming slightly towards the viewer. And then coming down the rest of the way. In fact, you could even proportionally block this out, just doing this like two planes. I may have exaggerated this a bit much. Pay attention to what I'm doing. See, I kind of move from the bottom of the left thigh to the outside of the right lower leg, the right shin. But from there, the feet, not quite parallel, the feet fanning out a little bit. And then coming back up here, I can say, all right, top of the head here. Yes, I need to block in the head and get the sense that the head is tipped back. But I'm going to move down first to kind of get the sense of the top of the rib cage. And before even rounding it out, I'm just putting a line there as a measurement, a sense of where I want to put that rib cage. And the reason for that is so that way I can start. Let's say if the head's up there, pelvis down here, and by the way, the pelvis, it's got an interesting thing going on in that the way he's diagramming it, he's got the pelvis kind of tilted backwards. Not significantly. I almost feel like, you know what? Just because it's me and I want to, be that guy, I feel like instead the pelvis is about upright. It's not tilted back as much as Reed has it. I'm choosing that, and I'm saying that what's happening instead is he's got the rib cage pretty much upright, and I'm saying what I'm going to choose to do is have the pelvis more upright, and then have the rib cage tilted back somewhat. Because that's what I see when I look not at his diagram, but when I look at the Degas piece. That's what I see. Now the whole point is when I started going into the the pelvis, it's because I was going to make it a point to say, all right, I see that at the top of the pelvis, that's where the wrist is. And then I can kind of do what I like to do, where I jut out and then back and find my way in to the shoulders. The shoulders are doing parallel things on the opposite side, so while you can see the shoulders are being pressed forward. Shoulders are coming forward. You know, if you take the pose, the model's actually doing, you know, your shoulders roll forward when your arms are, you know, pressing back. And I think just based on what I've got sketched out so far, I think I've made the legs too long. You know, and that's a point of, it's a point worth mentioning in terms of getting the pelvis first, getting it all the way locked down before adding legs. Because looking at the Degas, the knees seem not to come out as far as I sketched them. Or actually, that's interesting. It looks like they curve back. So the knees aren't out as far, but it does look like the feet are as far as I sketched them out. Only because, as opposed to the feet going straight down, they're coming forward. All right. I don't know if you can hear, but I've got a little cat meowing at my feet. Khaleesi's just in a mood tonight. It's almost to the point where I should, not Khaleesi. This is almost to the point where I should go in and darken it up. But I'm also, even though the feet are out as far horizontally, they are still hanging down too low, because as I make those thighs shorter, I also need to make the shins shorter. And I'm kind of treating the feet almost as one unit, even though they're not pressed together. Almost like treating them as a big flipper. I'm drawing sort of the outside from one foot to the outside of the other foot. And in fact, it looks a little bit like, you know, I kind of want to give her a little bit of a slouch. It feels almost like there's a slouch from, Reed does communicate the back curving like this, but I feel like that curve that you're getting is from this slouch that seems like she's got a little bit of. I think this is very interesting, doing a study from a Degas, because I've never really looked at Degas before. He's not one of my guys. It's not saying that he shouldn't be, or that he should be. It's just, he's one of those artists. I'm aware of his work. I'm aware, more of his place within art history, but I don't really, he's not a guy that I really looked at a lot of. Now this is the tough part. And Reed doesn't even get into this at all. But getting that underside of the neck, the fact that her neck is lifted up, and he is keeping it simple volumes. Now I'm going to make it a point, I have been drawing heads too small. So I might even be exaggerating this a little bit in an effort to get closer to the Degas. I'm also going to come back in here, erase this a little bit. Her shoulders are lifted up, and then the back of her, her trapezius muscles. I feel like they're just, in terms of this whole thing, shoulders roll back. It also looks like her trapezius muscles are lifted up, like a shrug almost. You've got her neck coming forward. It's more forward than I drew it. All right, at this point, I'm going to bring things in. By bring things, I mean bring the brush size in and the opacity up. So I can come in here. I've got the gesture. In fact, I went way beyond the stick figure that I tried to start with. So I'm going to start by looking, and now I'm making it a point to look at the Degas and not the Reed. And I'm going to try and capture what I see in the Degas, and then when I'm done, I know it sounds weird, the fact that I've got this drawing right next to Walt Reed's drawing, but I'm mentally really trying hard to block it out, focus on the Degas, and then come back when I'm done and make a comparison in terms of what he did structurally versus what I'm doing structurally. Not in the sense of competition. It is analysis. I want to learn, and I want to learn by going in here and trying to make my own mistakes, and then comparing my mistakes against Reed's analysis and solutions. I am peeking over just to see, all right, yeah, he is doing a linea alba, that line that runs down the center of the figure, not the Jessica Alba, the linea alba. That's an interesting thing that I think I may have just noticed. I believe that when Reed draws his torsos, I believe that he puts the divide between pelvis and upper torso. I believe he puts that divide about at the navel, which is interesting. And I notice here there's a little bit more of a pinch. The wrist is getting a little bit smaller, and I tend to draw wrists kind of too large. But the fact that there seems to be, there's compression right here Yeah. If you look at the negative space, and Reed isn't necessarily doing much as I say that when I'm doing a master study, I'm not trying to duplicate exactly what the other artists did. And obviously, in this comparison, I'm breaking that rule and I'm looking at his drawings. But I notice that there's a little bit of a pinch in terms of the. I'm going to erase this again and draw it again. Like if you look at where on Reed, let's say that I've got the navel right down here. Let's say that on Reed's diagram that my assessment of the division between upper torso and lower torso is the navel. If you look at that, he's got the wrist not too much farther above. Whereas in this figure, you've got the navel here, and you've got the wrist. Yes, the hand is down. Actually, even the hand is almost completely above the navel. But you've got that wrist really higher up, like kind of halfway between, almost like it's framing the breast. You've got, upper arm and lower arm, like it's a Pac-Man eating the breast. Waka, 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 waka. So I see that, and I think it's interesting because I think that it speaks to what I was saying about how I will occasionally miss the character of the pose, the character of the gesture. And I see that as an opportunity to get in there and capture both that position of the wrist and also kind of, I'm going to erase a little bit of that rib cage out there because he's got the hand resting on the pelvis. This hand is not resting on the pelvis. It's not resting on the. First off, it's above. It's resting kind of above the. Well, no, he does have it resting above the pelvis, but it's pressing in. It's pressing in to the pelvis. And it could be that I'm trying to get more in here than I'm getting more detailed and more specific than what Reed wants. Because as I've said, I've been trying to get myself to simplify and get to the essence. And these little things that I'm pointing out and that I'm kind of nitpicking here, these might be the kind of things he's like, nah, that's not important. So I'm noting them and I'm changing them, my own edification. But I can't say for sure that I'm like, oh, like this isn't the same as me in that previous pose where I was looking at that short ass upper thigh, that short ass upper leg, and comparing it to the lower leg. This is me saying, all right, I see nuances here in the mannequin phase of this drawing, and there are nuances that he's not putting down. But it may be that in this case, it's nuances that are counterproductive, getting lost in details that you would probably add in at a more refined level of a drawing. But I do feel like this figure feels more like the Degas figure than the figure he has, just in terms of capturing the posture. Like they both feel like the pose, but I think that this thing of like having the rib cage just leaned back just a little bit. Then having it come down. And, honestly, when I look at this, I said I want to draw it like it's upright. It really does look to me like the pelvis might be tilted slightly. Nah, that's getting too much in the weeds. But I also may have made the bottom of the pelvis a little bit too long. Might be more around here. See, now I've got the thing feeling wonky. Sometimes you do that. You start drawing and you're making changes and you're confident in what you're doing. Then all of a sudden you look at it and you're like, nah, this doesn't look right anymore. That happens. And you got to kind of just draw through it and try and assess what's wrong. Sometimes it's a matter of taking steps backwards. Other times it's just you draw through. You move forward and try and steer it back in a direction that feels like what it should be going in. Subtle thing here, capturing these calf muscles. And the idea that you've got, I mentioned before, I have problems. I have trouble drawing just off of 3/4 or just off of a front. And this is one where you've got, it's not quite a 3/4. Maybe the left leg might be a 3/4. The right leg, what it is that the feet are turned slightly outward, meaning that the right leg is not quite a profile. And that's tricky. This is tricky to me. And maybe I'm drawing this too much of 3/4. If you look at these ellipses that I'm drawing for the knees, Reed's ellipses are definitely narrower, both of them, but he definitely has it drawn such that, and now I'm adjusting it to just see what happens if I draw close to what he has, which is making this ellipse narrower. What it represents is I'm looking at more of a side view. So it's almost like she's got a little knock-kneed thing of the knees coming together, and then the feet turned out, which is interesting. Now I feel like I have to drop this pelvis lower. Bring this point of this head out a little bit more. Point of the chin. And the hair, again, drawing hair, that's a whole separate topic, and definitely a detail that Reed doesn't get into until much later in the book. So I'm just trying to get it like, here's a silhouette, and then just keeping that silhouette. Almost I'm just drawing cross contours around the whole silhouette, as if I'm drawing like an onion or something. But keeping it simple. The center line of the face, head tipped back, that nose up I definitely don't think that Reed, really focused on getting much of the underside of the nose there. Mouth tipped up. So I will tell you, this mannequin that I drew is not as elegant as the one that Reed drew, but I feel like it has more of the character of the Degas. Feet there. And now I'm just rounding this out a little bit. And I'm just polishing this. There's no reason to polish this. It's a rough sketch. It's a construction sketch. I don't know why I feel the need to polish it, but I do. But now coming back and looking in comparison, there's things I see that comparing to Reed's. I think that other than what I really did with the shoulders, the main difference is that, again, myself and my habits from figure drawing classes, that I'm not giving her tiny arms. I'm giving her broader shoulders. And I actually, I think I did, yeah. There's more going on in the rib cage than just what I've got here. I mean, more going on in the torso, in that there's a turn, like that. The press that I wanted to get, which was the hand pressed in there, I don't think I'm getting as. The problem is that that's something that's difficult to capture in the mannequin state, because if I go in here and I just erase a little bit, really what you need is a convex line, a line pushing outward, counter to the hand. And I don't think that really reads that well. Yeah, you would really need tone to communicate more of that. I'd say the knees aren't bad, although I can look now and definitely say, all right, there's a reason why the ellipse of the right knee is wider, is because now looking at it, I can very clearly see more of like how close together these ellipses are, or rather how the origin of the ellipse, the pelvis, the distance between the ellipse that's making up the knee over here and the ellipse over here of the leg attaching to the pelvis, they're closer, so there's more foreshortening going on. Which seems weird to me that they're foreshortened and yet this foot is still turning outward, which leads me to believe that there's a whole lot more. Like if I were drawing this, if I were like developing this drawing, if I were going to take this into more of a finish, I would do something where I probably would have the leg turned in, but then like I would have the knee turned in and then push that foot out even more. Not way out, but more than I have it. So you can see there's more of a distinct, like you get the sense that there's foreshortening. And then a twist. I would go for that more. I think that I would push more of what's happening, where I would have the abs, the belly pushed out. The pelvis pushed in, and then counter that with, much like she's got that back rounding, I would round that back more. But that again, comic book artists, studying animation, plussing the pose, pushing the pose, those are all things that I think come from that storytelling side. Whereas I don't think Degas, it's not that I don't think Degas is storytelling visually here, but I think that his approach is more naturalistic. This is speaking as somebody who is not a Degas scholar, has not studied his work extensively, as I said earlier. But he's not coming in there, it looks to me, at least in this image, he's not coming in there and trying to push the pose. It looks like he's trying to capture a naturalistic moment. Whereas I see this and I see, can I twist the body a little bit more? And who knows, twisting it like that might ruin it. When I say that, I mean I would probably do 3 or 4 developed sketches just working out what's going on with the torso and trying to decide how far I can push it. Because who knows, maybe what makes this pose work could well be a very subtle S-curve, as opposed to twisting it, like the S-curve that I've got here. So who knows? All right, there we go. We've had a good long session. We definitely blew through a lot of stuff here. So when we come back next session in 2 weeks, we will pick up in, what do we call this section? We'll call this section Drawing the Basic Form, because that's what the section we started with is called. But now we're doing studies. It's got a Degas in here, a Picasso, I mentioned that, a Joseph Hirsch. So we'll pick up with the Degas, the Picasso. And we'll go on from there. And, it's got a drawing in here where he talks about styles. We've got 3 different artists drawing the same style. He's got his do's and don'ts, which I've said on page 44 and 45 are the most important sections in this entire book. And then we get to chapter 2, which is actual anatomy. That will be interesting. All of this has been structure and volume. That's what chapter 1 is. Again, doesn't get to gesture drawing until 138, but the structure work is what I consider really the fundamental. It's the reason why I've fallen in love with this book more and more, as we've been drawing from it, studying from it. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for being patrons, for being Patreon subscribers. I appreciate it. You make the work that I continue to do possible. You make it possible for me to continue to study and improve and grow in my craft. Continue to work on comics. And yes, I am going to get back to comics at some point. In fact, I was even thinking today about how I'm going to attack the outlining. I'm sort of mentally outlining before I sit down and hit the page. But I keep telling myself I got to get into the writing flow and get into committing writing every day as well as drawing every day. So far, I've been putting a lot more time into the figure drawing and working on that cover for Morningstar. I need to get back to the writing. It's there. It's waiting for me. And once I start doing it, it's not going to be scary. It's going to be fun. It is fun once it gets started. It's that starting and that apprehension that's always the hardest part. But again, you guys make it possible. I appreciate you. I love you guys. Thank you for being here. If there's any questions, any comments, anything that you thought I would address, things you think I got wrong, I'm always here to hear and listen. Leave comments. To be a back and forth. I want it to be a conversation. If there's things you want to see or things that you think I should dig into further in here, let me know. But yes, I greatly appreciate it. I'm going to wrap it up. I will see you again in another 2 weeks for our book study group. That's it for now. Go be creative.